When a Bigfoot led me to a cave containing the belongings of 12 missing children in the summer of 1974, I realized these creatures weren't the monsters we thought they were. They were trying to help us, trying to protect the most vulnerable among us from the real predators that walked on two legs and wore human faces. What I discovered in those woods changed everything I believed about the disappearances that had haunted our community for years and forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about the natural world and our place in it. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 57 years old now, retired, and living quietly in a small cabin outside Arcata, California. But back in 1974, I was a search and rescue coordinator for Humboldt County, Northern California, during one of the darkest and most terrifying periods in our state's history. For decades, I've kept silent about what really happened that summer, bound by a mixture of official pressure, personal fear, and the knowledge that some truths are too strange for the world to accept. But it's time the truth comes out, because those children deserve to have their real story told, and those creatures deserve to be remembered for what they truly were, heroes in a form we never expected. The summer of 1974 was supposed to be like any other in Humboldt County, California, that remote northwestern corner of the state where the Pacific Ocean crashes against rugged coastline and ancient redwood forests stretch as far as the eye can see. The redwoods in our region are the tallest trees on Earth, some of them over 300 feet high and more than 2,000 years old, survivors from an era when their kind covered much of the northern hemisphere. Tourists flocked from all over the world to see these giants, to walk among trees that had been saplings when Rome fell, to feel small and temporary in the presence of something so vast and enduring. Local people went about their business in the small logging towns scattered throughout the region, places like Arcata, Eureka, Oric, Trinidad, towns that had grown up alongside the timber industry and depended on it for survival. It was a quiet corner of America, far from the big cities, far from the violence and chaos that seemed to dominate the news in those post-Vietnam, post-Watergate years. We thought we were safe here, insulated by distance and the great wall of trees that surrounded us. But that summer became a nightmare that our community would never forget, a descent into fear and paranoia that would change us all forever. It started on June 3rd, 1974, a day that began like any other perfect Northern California summer day. 8-year-old Jenny Patterson disappeared from her family's campsite in Prairie Creek Redwood State Park, one of the most popular camping areas in our region, known for its stunning old-growth redwood groves and easy access to hiking trails. The Pattersons were from Sacramento, a middle-class family enjoying their annual summer camping trip, the kind of wholesome family vacation that defined the American dream. In those days, Jenny's father worked as an accountant, her mother was a homemaker, and they had 3 kids, Jenny being the youngest and by all accounts the most adventurous, always eager to explore and discover. That afternoon, the family had been preparing dinner at their designated campsite, one of the developed sites with a picnic table, fire ring, and bear-proof food locker. They were cooking hamburgers on a portable grill, the smell of charcoal and meat mixing with the scent of pine and redwood bark. Jenny and her 10-year-old brother Danny had been playing near the tent, well within sight of their parents, no more than 30 feet away. They were building a fort out of fallen branches and ferns, the kind of innocent woodland play that children had engaged in for generations in these forests. Her mother Susan turned away for maybe 2 minutes, perhaps less, to grab something from their station wagon, which was parked just 20 feet behind the campsite. When she looked back toward where the children had been playing, Jenny was gone. Danny said his sister had been there one moment, crouched down arranging branches for their fort, talking to him about what they should use for a roof. Then he'd turned away for just a few seconds to grab another branch from a nearby pile. When he looked back, she simply wasn't there anymore. No scream, no struggle, no sound at all, not even the rustle of movement through the undergrowth. Just gone, as if she'd been plucked from existence by an invisible hand. He called her name, thinking she was playing hide and seek, but got no response. He checked behind nearby trees and bushes, expecting her to jump out laughing at having fooled him. But she was nowhere. That's when he ran to get his parents, and that's when the nightmare began. The search began immediately with the kind of organized chaos that only a missing child can generate. As the local search and rescue coordinator, a position I'd held for 7 years by that point, I received the call at 4:15 in the afternoon. By 5 o'clock, I was at the campsite, interviewing the distraught parents and organizing search teams. By 6, I'd assembled every available volunteer within a 50-mile radius. We had 70 people combing through that forest by nightfall, more arriving every hour as word spread through the community. Rangers from the state and national parks, police officers from every jurisdiction in the county, volunteer firefighters who knew first aid and wilderness survival, experienced hikers who'd spent years exploring these trails, even local loggers who knew those woods better than anyone, men who'd worked in the timber industry for decades and could navigate the densest undergrowth with their eyes closed. We organized into grid search patterns, each team assigned a specific area to comb. Methodically, we had search dogs, German shepherds trained to track human scent, their handlers veterans of dozens of successful searches. We brought in portable floodlights powered by generators, turning night into day across acres of forest. The sound of people calling Jenny's name echoed through the redwoods for hours, desperate voices bouncing off those massive tree trunks, creating an eerie chorus that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We found nothing. Not a footprint in the soft earth near the campsite, despite the area having perfect conditions for tracking. Not a piece of torn clothing snagged on branches, though the undergrowth was dense enough that anyone moving through it quickly would inevitably leave trace evidence. Not a single trace of Jenny Patterson anywhere. It was as if she'd simply evaporated into the ancient redwoods, dissolved into mist, and filtered away through the canopy above the search dogs, normally reliable to the point of being almost infallible. Lost her scent completely 30 yards from the campsite, as if she'd been picked up and carried away through the air itself. We searched for 3 straight days, expanding the radius each day, covering more than 15 square miles of wilderness. We found nothing. Eventually, we had to scale back, though we never officially closed the case. Jenny Patterson had vanished without a trace, and her devastated parents had to return to Sacramento without their daughter, without answers, without closure, carrying a grief that would never fully heal. 2 weeks later, on June 17th, it happened again, and this time I knew we were dealing with something far worse than a tragic accident or a child who'd simply gotten lost. 12-year-old Marcus Duca vanished from a Boy Scout camping trip near Auric, a small logging town about 20 miles north of where Jenny had disappeared. Marcus was with Troop 147 from Eureka, a group of 16 boys and 4 adult leaders on what should have been a routine weekend camping trip, the kind of outdoor education experience that Scouts had been doing safely for decades. He'd gone to gather firewood with 3 other Scouts, stayed within shouting distance of the camp and never came back. The other boys said they'd heard him calling out that he'd found a good fallen branch, and then silence. When they went to check on him 30 seconds later, he was gone. The branch he'd mentioned lay on the ground, but Marcus had disappeared. By the end of July, 5 children had vanished from various locations throughout the Humboldt County forests, all between the ages of 7 and 13, all taken in broad daylight or early evening, all without witnesses, without sounds of struggle, without any evidence left behind. The FBI got involved. State police flooded the area. News crews from San Francisco and Los Angeles descended on our quiet towns. Parents stopped letting their children play outside campgrounds emptied. Tourism died overnight, and a dark cloud of fear settled over Northern California like fog rolling in from the Pacific. I was working 20-hour days coordinating search parties, following up on leads that went nowhere, interviewing witnesses who had nothing useful to tell us. The pressure was crushing. Every day without answers, every search that turned up empty, felt like a personal failure. My wife Margaret barely saw me that summer. When I did come home to our small house in Arcata, I'd collapse into bed for a few hours before heading back out. She'd leave coffee and sandwiches for me, rarely complaining, understanding the weight I was carrying. The theories multiplied. A serial predator, people said a kidnapping ring, cult activity. There were rumors of communes hidden deep in the forests. Some people even suggested the children had gotten lost and died from exposure. Though that didn't explain the complete lack of evidence, I heard the Bigfoot theories too. Of course, Northern California was Sasquatch country, and there were always locals who blamed every strange occurrence on the legendary creature. Most of the time I dismissed such talk as folklore and superstition. I'd worked in these forests for 15 years and never seen anything that convinced me Bigfoot was real. That changed on August 12th, 1974. We just received a report of another missing child. 9-year-old Emma Rodriguez had vanished from a family picnic area near the Klamath River. It was the 6th disappearance in just over 2 months, and the community was reaching a breaking point. Armed civilians were organizing their own search parties. There was talk of vigilante justice against anyone who looked suspicious. The situation was spiraling out of control. I was leading a search team deep into the forest east of where Emma had disappeared. With me were 4 experienced searchers. Bill Kowalski, a logger in his 40s who'd lived in Humboldt his entire life. Sarah Chen, a park ranger in her 30s with exceptional tracking skills, Pete Morrison. A retired Marine in his 50s who volunteered with search and rescue. And Linda Hayes, a local teacher in her late 20s who knew the area from years of hiking. We'd been searching for hours, moving in a grid pattern through dense forest, calling Emma's name, looking for any sign of her. The afternoon sun filtered through the towering redwoods, creating an almost dreamlike quality to the light, but there was nothing dreamlike about our mission. "Robert, over here," Sarah called out. She was about 30 yards to my left, crouching near the base of a massive redwood. "I've got something." My heart leapt as we all converged on her position. She was examining the ground, her trained eyes picking up details the rest of us would miss. "Footprints," she said, pointing to depressions in the soft earth. "But they're strange. Too large for a child, but the pattern of movement suggests someone carrying something heavy." I knelt beside her, examining the prints. They were indeed unusual, broader than normal human prints and deeper on one side, as if whoever made them was carrying weight unevenly. They led deeper into the forest, away from any established trails. "Could be our guy," Pete said grimly, his hand moving instinctively toward the hunting knife on his belt. "Could be carrying Emma." "We follow carefully," I said, pulling out my radio. "Bill, call this into base. Give them our coordinates. Tell them we're tracking what might be a lead, but we need backup." Bill pulled out his walkie-talkie while the rest of us began following the trail. The prints led us through increasingly dense undergrowth into a part of the forest that clearly saw little human traffic. The canopy above grew thicker, reducing the sunlight to a dim green glow. We walked for maybe 20 minutes, moving slowly, carefully, trying to stay quiet, while still calling Emma's name periodically. Then Sarah stopped suddenly, holding up her hand for silence. We all froze. "Listen," she whispered. At first I heard nothing but the usual forest sounds. Birds, the rustle of wind through branches, the distant sound of water. Then I heard it. A voice, a child's voice, faint but unmistakable, somewhere ahead of us. "Emma!" I called out. "Emma Rodriguez, can you hear me?" The voice stopped, then came again, clearer this time. "Help! Someone help!" We moved faster now, caution giving way to urgency. The voice was coming from somewhere ahead, beyond a thick stand of ferns and berry bushes. We pushed through, branches scratching at our faces and arms, and then we burst into a small clearing. What we saw made us all stop dead in our tracks, frozen in a moment that would replay in my mind for the rest of my life. Emma Rodriguez sat against the trunk of a fallen redwood, her clothes dirty and torn, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her hair tangled with bits of leaves and small twigs. But she was alive, she was conscious, her eyes were open and alert. She was okay, or at least appeared to be physically unharmed. Relief flooded through me so powerfully I almost fell to my knees. But that relief lasted only a split second before being replaced by something else entirely, because that wasn't what made us freeze. What made us freeze, what made my breath catch in my throat and my heart seemingly stop beating in my chest, was what was standing between us and Emma, positioned protectively in front of the little girl like a guardian or sentinel. It was easily 8 feet tall, possibly closer to 8.5, towering over us with a presence that was both terrifying and somehow strangely majestic. It was covered from head to toe in dark, reddish-brown hair, long and shaggy, the color of old rust or dried blood, the kind of hair that seemed to absorb the dim forest light rather than reflect it. The hair was thicker on the shoulders and back, thinner on the face and chest where I could see hints of dark skin beneath. The shoulders were massive, broader than any humans could possibly be, sloping into arms that were disproportionately long, hanging down past where the knees would be, arms built for climbing and pulling and carrying enormous weight. The hands at the end of those arms were huge, easily twice the size of my own, with thick fingers and what looked like dark nails or claws. The legs were shorter in proportion to the body than a human's would be, powerfully muscled, built for moving through rough terrain and climbing steep slopes. The feet, partially visible beneath the hair, looked massive and flat, perfectly adapted for distributing weight across soft forest floor. But it was the face that held my attention, the face that made this undeniably real and undeniably something other than any known animal. The face was simultaneously human and utterly alien, existing in some uncanny valley between familiar and impossible. The head was somewhat cone-shaped, sloping back from a heavy, pronounced brow ridge that jutted out over deep-set eyes. The eyes themselves were dark, almost black, but clearly intelligent, clearly aware, watching us with an expression I could only describe as cautious assessment. The nose was flat and broad, the nostrils large and flaring slightly with each breath. The jaw was massive, prognathic, jutting forward more than a human's, but less than a gorilla's. When the creature breathed, I could see its chest rising and falling, could hear the sound of air moving through those large nostrils, could see the slight condensation of breath in the cool forest air. This was no legend. This was no shadow or misidentified bear. This was a living, breathing creature standing 15 feet in front of me, as real as the trees around us. Behind me, I heard Linda gasp, a sharp intake of breath followed by what might have been the beginning of a scream that she managed to choke off. Pete's hand went instantly to the hunting knife on his belt, his military training kicking in, ready to defend us against a threat. Bill muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer, his face gone pale beneath his logger's tan. Sarah stood frozen, her tracking skills and park ranger training suddenly completely irrelevant in the face of something that, according to every scientific textbook, didn't exist and never had. Nobody move, I said quietly, though my own heart was hammering so hard I could barely hear my own voice. Just stay calm. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching us, assessing us. And then it did something that changed everything. It stepped aside. Deliberately, carefully, it moved to the side, no longer blocking our path to Emma, and it looked at me, directly at me, with eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. Then it gestured, a surprisingly human motion toward Emma. Go to her, that gesture said. She needs you. It's okay. I said to my team, though I had no idea if it was okay. "I'm going to get Emma." I moved forward slowly, keeping my hands visible, trying to project calm despite the adrenaline coursing through my system. The creature watched me, but didn't move, didn't threaten. As I reached Emma and knelt beside her, checking her for injuries, I could feel those intelligent eyes on me. "Are you hurt?" I asked Emma gently. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I was so scared. I got lost and I couldn't find my way back, and then he found me." "He?" I asked. She pointed at the creature. "He brought me here. He gave me berries to eat. He kept me safe." I looked up at the massive being. Up close, I could see the details, the way its chest rose and fell with breath, the calluses on its hands, the wear on its teeth, visible when it opened its mouth slightly, the scars from a lifetime in the wilderness. This was no legend. This was a living, breathing creature, and it had protected a lost child. The creature made a low sound, not quite a growl, more like a rumble of vocalization. Then it turned and gestured again, this time toward the forest. It wanted us to follow. "Robert," Pete said behind me, "we need to get Emma out of here and call this in." "No," I said, surprising myself. "We follow." "Are you insane?" Bill asked. "That thing just saved a little girl's life," I said. "And it wants to show us something. We follow." The creature led us deeper into the forest, moving with surprising grace for something so massive and powerful. Despite its size and bulk, it moved through the dense undergrowth almost silently, barely disturbing the ferns and branches that we stumbled through clumsily in our hiking boots. It would pause occasionally, turning back to look at us with those dark, intelligent eyes, waiting patiently for us to catch up, making sure we were still following, that we hadn't gotten lost or fallen behind. Emma held my hand tightly, no longer afraid now that she was with us, now that she was surrounded by familiar human faces. But she would glance up at the creature periodically with an expression that looked almost like affection, or at least trust, the way a child might look at a protective older sibling or parent. After about 15 minutes of hiking through increasingly remote terrain, following game trails that probably hadn't seen human traffic in years, winding around fallen logs covered in moss and mushrooms, crossing small streams that trickled down from higher elevations, we came to the base of a steep rocky hillside that rose up sharply from the forest floor. Ancient volcanic stone covered in lichens and patches of ferns growing in cracks and crevices. There, partially hidden by a curtain of ferns and moss that hung down like a natural screen, obscured from casual view by strategically placed branches that looked like they'd been deliberately arranged, was the mouth of a cave. The opening was about 4 feet high and maybe 6 feet wide, irregular in shape, leading back into darkness. The creature stopped several yards away from the cave entrance and pointed with one massive arm, that surprisingly human gesture again. Then it looked at me directly, those dark eyes meeting mine, and made that rumbling sound again, deeper this time, more insistent. "Go inside," it seemed to say. "Look at what's there. See what I'm trying to show you." I pulled out my flashlight, as did the others. My hands were shaking slightly as I switched it on, the beam cutting through the dim forest light and illuminating the cave entrance. Sarah went in first, her training overcoming her fear, her flashlight sweeping across the cave walls and ceiling, checking for hazards, for unstable rock, for animals that might be sheltering inside. I followed close behind with Emma still holding my hand, Pete and Bill and Linda right behind us. The cave wasn't deep, maybe 30 feet from entrance to back wall, but it was taller than I'd expected once we got past the low entrance, opening up into a chamber that was almost comfortable in its dimensions, high enough to stand in, wide enough for all of us to spread out. The floor was relatively flat and dry, covered in a layer of soft dirt and decomposed leaves. And scattered throughout that cave, arranged almost carefully, almost reverently, were belongings, children's belongings. A pink backpack with a unicorn printed on it, the kind an 8-year-old girl might carry to school. The fabric was dirty and water-stained, but intact. A Boy Scout handbook, its pages swollen from moisture but still recognizable, the cover showing the distinctive Boy Scout emblem, a stuffed teddy bear, brown and worn. Missing one eye, the kind of beloved companion a child might take on a camping trip for comfort. A pair of small sneakers, size probably 2 or 3 based on how tiny they looked, bright red with white laces. A baseball cap with a Little League team logo embroidered on the front. A plastic water bottle, half full, with stickers covering its surface, a small Swiss Army knife. A friendship bracelet made of colored thread. A comic book, its pages wrinkled and faded. More items, dozens of them, scattered across the cave floor or arranged on natural stone shelves formed by the irregular rock walls. Every item clearly belonging to children, every item a piece of someone's life, someone who should have taken it home with them but hadn't. But what truly made my blood run cold, what made me understand the full horror of what we were looking at, was the cave wall. There, scratched into the soft stone with something sharp, maybe a nail or a piece of harder rock, were names. Names carved with the irregular, uncertain hand of children. Jenny Patterson, Marcus Duca, Emma Rodriguez, and 9 more names I recognized instantly. 9 names that had been haunting me for weeks, names I'd repeated countless times in search, briefings and press conferences. All the missing children, every single one. "Oh my God," Linda whispered. "They were all here." "But where are they now?" Sarah asked, her voice tight. I turned back toward the cave entrance where the creature still stood. "Where are the other children?" I asked it, knowing it was absurd to expect an answer but unable to help myself. The creature's response was to turn and move deeper into the forest, again gesturing for us to follow. This time, I noticed something I'd missed before. The creature was limping slightly, favoring its left leg, and there, on its shoulder, I could see what looked like an old wound, partially healed, but still visible through the hair. We followed for another 20 minutes, until we heard voices ahead. Children's voices, and adult voices too, but not friendly ones. Angry, commanding voices. The creature stopped and crouched low, gesturing for us to do the same. We crawled forward through the undergrowth until we could see a clearing ahead. What I saw there made rage surge through me like nothing I'd ever felt. There were children, at least 8 of them that I could see, huddled together in the center of a makeshift camp. Around them stood 4 men, all wearing what looked like military surplus clothing. One of them held a rifle. Another was securing rope around a tree. This wasn't a rescue operation. This was a kidnapping camp. "We take the girl," I heard one of the men say. "Leave the rest here until the buyer comes tomorrow." Buyers. They were selling children. Pete's hand was on my shoulder, his grip tight. "We need to back out," he whispered. "Call for backup. We're outnumbered and they're armed." He was right, of course. That was the protocol, but those were children down there, and we'd already lost weeks before I could decide. The creature made the decision for us. It stood up, no longer hiding, and let out a sound that I can only describe as a roar, but deeper, more resonant, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. The men in the clearing spun around, weapons coming up. The children screamed. And then 3 more massive shapes emerged from the forest around the clearing, more of them, a whole family group surrounding the camp. What happened next happened fast. The men fired, but their bullets seemed to have little effect, either missing in their panic or hitting non-vital areas. The creatures didn't attack with violence. Instead, they moved with coordinated precision. One swept the rifle from a man's hands with a backhanded blow that sent the weapon flying. Another simply grabbed a man by his jacket and threw him 10 feet into a tree trunk where he crumpled, unconscious. The third man tried to run, but found his path blocked by another creature. Within 30 seconds, it was over. The men were either unconscious, disarmed, or had fled into the forest. The children, initially terrified, seemed to realize that the creatures weren't there to hurt them. One of them, a boy I recognized as Marcus Duca, actually ran to one of the creatures and hugged its leg. "They saved us," he said to me as we entered the clearing. "They'd been bringing us food and keeping us safe until someone could find us." Over the next hour, as backup arrived and we secured the site and gathered the children, I pieced together what had happened. The men had been part of a kidnapping ring operating throughout Northern California, taking children from remote areas where there were few witnesses, but the Bigfoot creatures had been watching. They'd been rescuing the children when they could, hiding them, protecting them, keeping them alive in that cave until they could lead rescuers to them. The creature I'd first encountered had been wounded trying to protect Emma from one of the kidnappers. All 12 children were recovered alive. 4 men were arrested that day, and their investigation led to the dismantling of a larger criminal network. The official story, carefully managed by federal authorities, made no mention of Bigfoot. As far as the public knew, an anonymous tip had led us to the camp, but I knew the truth. Those creatures, those beings that science said didn't exist, had saved 12 children's lives. They'd shown intelligence, compassion, and courage that most humans would struggle to match. I returned to that cave a week later, alone, carrying a bag of apples and jerky. I left it at the entrance as a thank you, feeling foolish but needing to do something. The next day I returned and the bag was gone. In its place was a smooth river stone with what looked like a handprint pressed into it. I kept that stone. I keep it still, 30 years later, as a reminder that the world is stranger and more wonderful than we like to admit, that the monsters in the woods aren't always the ones we fear, and that sometimes the most human thing you can encounter isn't human at all. My wife Margaret asked me once if I really believed what I'd seen. I showed her the stone, told her about the children, about the intelligence in those eyes. She held my hand and said that maybe the world needs a few mysteries left in it. Maybe she was right. I never saw the creatures again, though I hiked those forests for years afterward. But sometimes, early in the morning when the fog was thick and the redwoods seemed to touch the sky, I'd feel like I was being watched, not threateningly, not dangerously, but protectively, like something was still out there, still keeping watch over those woods and the people in them. The missing children recovered, every one of them. They grew up, had families of their own, moved on with their lives. But none of them ever forgot what saved them that summer, and every August some of them come back to Humboldt County, hike into those forests, and leave gifts at the base of certain trees. Apples mostly, sometimes berries or dried meat. We never talk about why. We don't need to, we all know. Because in the summer of 1974, we learned that monsters don't live in the forest. We do. And somewhere among the ancient redwoods, guardians still walk, silent and unseen, watching over the woods they've called home for longer than we can imagine, waiting, perhaps, for the day when we finally prove ourselves worthy of sharing their world.